there, welcome back to my channel. My name is Andrea Odobi Teke. If you are just joining, welcome to the self-discovery series. It has been a fun time from the first episode up to this episode, and I wanted also to say a special thank you to those who reached out saying they needed me to do this particular episode. And yeah, we're going to be doing this. In our previous episode, we talked about self-discovery and self-development. And in one of the tips I gave, I mentioned that you have to identify your blind spot. And some people reached out saying they don't exactly know what a blind spot is, not to talk of how to identify these blind spots. And which is bringing me to doing this episode. So today, on this episode, I'm going to be sharing with you how to identify your blind spot. So if you're one of those who are saying, how can I identify my blind spot? What exactly is a blind spot? Remember I told you that a blind spot or your blind spots are things that trigger you. We don't necessarily see them with our eyes, our bare eyes, but we have them somehow. It triggers us to act irrationally to the next person, thinking they are the problem, not knowing that the problem actually is from you. And sometimes you react to it when somehow this person or situation brings back that feeling or makes you or triggers you exactly. That's why it's called a trigger. That's why it's a blind spot, because you don't see it with your two eyes. You feel it, you have it in you due to either your past or something, a habit that you have cultivated over the years, and somehow it is affecting you to act a certain way. So today we would be sharing how to identify these blind spots. Now the good thing is, they say that if you're close to getting, before you get a solution to a problem, identify what the problem is. Now, when you have identified what the problem is, it makes it easier for you to find a solution to that particular problem. So that's why we're here. In a short time, don't go away. I'll be sharing with you how to identify these blind spots. Just stay with me.
The self-discovery series. We'll be right back. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. It's still the self-discovery series. Yes, so let's go straight to it. I said that we will be identifying our blind spots. Now, if you're one of those, just like I said earlier, that somehow you've been asking yourself, what are these blind spots? She said I should identify my blind spot, but what are blind spots? Okay, I said that they trigger you. So what triggers me? And I'm glad that we're doing this. So if you're one who you're thinking, you've not exactly put a finger in it to say, okay, this is what triggers me, or this is I act a certain way because of this particular thing. Remember, I said that your blind spots are your triggers, something that triggers you to act irrationally most of the time to other people, or sometimes to yourself. I'll be giving you examples of these triggers, and then when I mention, I'm sure that you can say, yes, this is me. I act a certain way because of this particular feeling. Now, somehow, these triggers, they motivate us to, of course, I said that earlier, it motivates us to act irrationally, it motivates us to fight others or even ourselves. It sometimes stimulates a certain feeling. Is either a feeling from a past, a feeling from a certain incident, something that must have happened to you in the past that made you, that had a scar, kind of, an unhealed wound. Yeah. Yes. It's like, you know, when you scratch a surface of an injury and it starts bleeding again. You get it? So that's what triggers do to you. Now, I will be sharing with you some of these triggers. But first, I would like for you, since we're still talking self-discovery and self-development, I would like for you to have an open mind. Remember that in our last episode, I also mentioned that you need to have an open mind to constructive criticisms. So one of the things I will be sharing with you today, sometimes we might be in self-denial to these triggers. But this, I want you to have an open mind. This will help you identify, okay, this is my blind spot. And then from knowing that this is your blind spot, you can move to, well, I wouldn't exactly say being trigger free, because we are never trigger free. Something would trigger you, something would definitely make you feel a certain way, but somehow you can learn to minimize the way you react to that particular trigger. Am I making sense? So let's go straight to these triggers, knowing what these triggers are. Remember I said, if I mention your trigger, own it. Have an open mind, accept it. We also mentioned accepting yourself, acknowledging your flaws, your strengths, your weaknesses in the last episode. Accept yourself. So this also, you need to accept it. They are your triggers. Own it. Now when you own it, it makes it easy for you to work with them. Right. Okay, so let's go. What are these triggers? Now for some people, their trigger is feeling rejected. For some people, their trigger is feeling abandoned. Maybe in your past, your father abandoned you, your mother abandoned you, you had a bad past about somebody abandoning you. Now, in the future, probably the person who you are in a relationship with somehow is telling you, I'm sorry, we can't move further in this relationship. And you start feeling triggered because you thought or you felt abandoned. You are triggered. You start acting irrationally to this person and also to yourself because there's a feeling of abandon. Right. A feeling of being abandoned, rather. So that's a trigger. That is a trigger. Remember I said triggers are things you can't exactly see, blind spots, you can't exactly see them, but you feel them, you have them in you. And somehow when you're triggered, when that feeling comes, you feel triggered and it motivates you to fight against people or against yourself. It motivates you to act irrationally. So yeah, if this is your trigger, own it. Another trigger is feeling disrespected. Wow, for me, I own this. I mean, nobody likes feeling disrespected. It is a trigger. And remember, I also said that we cannot be completely trigger free. Knowing your trigger will help you to act better to the situation that brought about the trigger. For instance, feeling disrespected is my trigger. I don't like being disrespected for any reason. In fact, I'm sure that a lot of people don't like being disrespected. I hate it with so much passion. Now, it is a trigger, right? Because I know that I don't like feeling disrespected, I avoid situations that would make me be disrespected. Now, even if I am disrespected, because I know that it's my trigger, it helps me to manage it well, rather than acting irrationally to what triggered me, which is the feeling of being disrespected. Now, I own it. That's my trigger. It could be your trigger as well. It could be your blind spot. Now, let's move to another blind spot. Let's see. The feeling of being judged or criticized. I would say that's a very general trigger, but for some people it's just high up there. If you're somebody who on a normal, you don't like being judged, nobody loves being judged, but somehow you don't like being judged. Whenever you are being judged, do you react? Oh, why did you, oh my God, how can you do that? Or you just shout at the person, or yes, you just act irrationally. It is a trigger. Own it. That is a blind spot. Now, another thing is the lack of confidence. Are you someone who you feel triggered when you realize that you cannot do something, or you feel that you are not exactly confident enough and you are fighting yourself for it? You are angry with yourself. You don't feel right about yourself. That is a trigger. Lack of confidence could trigger you to act irrationally to yourself most of the time. So it is a trigger. Identify that. Another trigger is the feeling of insecurity. Oh my goodness. This is like the height. Not exactly the height. I mean, there are other triggers. This particular one, a lot of people die even in silence because of insecurity. They fight themselves because of insecurity. This happens a lot, especially in relationships. You feel triggered because your partner seems to be doing more well than you, especially for guys this time. Remember I said that trigger is a tool your ego uses to fight against you or against people. So most times you're feeling triggered because your partner is doing better than you. You think your partner is doing better than you, and so you feel triggered. That's a blind spot. That's the trigger. Another feeling or another trigger is failure. This one, trust me, a lot of people, in fact, for myself, I hate failure. I hate failure to the very name itself, failure. I hate it with passion. It triggers me seriously. Now, I'll tell you a quick story, a personal story. Now, this happened to me many years ago. I won't say many years ago, well, a few years ago, where I was trying to start up something for myself. And I tried doing that thing several times and it wasn't working. I tried the first time, it seemed like it was working. I've invested so much money into this project. I've spoken to so many people, and it was seeming like, okay, this is making sense. At the nick of the time I thought it was going to, just explode and become what I wanted it to be, it all came crumbling. It all came crashing down on me. I fell into a very strong depression for the longest of times, trust me. Many people didn't know that I was depressed, but it was eating me on deep on the inside. That was a trigger. The feeling of failure. I thought I had failed. I thought nothing else that I would ever do would be successful. In fact, there was a time that I became afraid to try something new because I still had that feeling of failure. It was a trigger. It triggered me so deeply in a very bad light. It made me feel I couldn't do anything else that would be successful. And I would also go into the next trigger, which is the feeling of fear. It is also a trigger. But hey, I had to tell myself, I'm not a failure. It took me a while for me to understand that it was the feeling of failure that stopped me from doing something new, that stopped me from actually coming out of my shell. The feeling of failure is a trigger. I had that trigger and I own it. So if you are someone who has that feeling of fear, of failure, you must have tried several things and it seemed like it's not working. And now you're trying to start something else. You're afraid, oh, this might fail. What if it fails? What if it becomes a failure, just like what happened the other time? What if I never make it? What if they don't like it? This altogether is the trigger. If you're one who feels this way, own it. Identify it is a blind spot. I also mentioned fear. There's several kinds of fear. So fear in itself is a trigger. It is a blind spot. Identify it. Another blind spot is the feeling of, I think this particular one is intertwined with you feeling the feeling of comparison. Being compared, you compare yourself to other people. You are always, do I look like this person? Is my thing better than this person's? And somehow this person is doing better than you, seemingly doing better than you. You're triggered. You either feel less of yourself. That's a trigger. That's a blind spot. Identify it. Another thing is the feeling of superiority. If you're a person who you feel superior, you think that, well, people should see you as a superior. And somehow if you are treated the other way around, you're triggered, you feel bad. You want to fight the person. Why did you talk to me that way? Why did you act to me that way? You're not supposed to act to me that way. Because you have the feeling of superiority. And most of the time I tell people that there's usually a fine line between superiority and inferiority. That is also a blind spot, the feeling of inferiority and also the feeling of superiority. Those are blind spots and those are also triggers. Somehow, maybe for people who feel superior, due to the fact that you feel superior, people should respect you, people should view you as a superior human or individual. And when you are not treated that way, you feel triggered, you feel upset. Something made you feel upset. It's not because that person maybe did not disrespect you, because most of the time it's not the other person who's at fault, although there's also a 70% that the person might be at fault, but the rest of the percentage might be coming from you. That's because you have the feeling of superiority, and when you're not treated as such, you're triggered. Now, for you feeling inferior, somehow you are feeling inferior because you think that this other person has got what you don't have. You feel less, you feel small. You can't stand up, you're not confident enough to stand up to say things, especially around people who are your peers. I know that there's also the feeling of lack of confidence as well. It is also a syndrome that is called the imposter syndrome. We'll talk about that in a moment. I mean, one of our episodes will definitely talk about that. But yeah, somehow you feel small. You might have achieved so much, but you still feel small. You still feel less of yourself. You still feel like you are not doing so much. You don't value yourself as much. That is a feeling of inferiority, and it's also a trigger. For some people, they're actually feeling inferior, but they act. They act superior. They act like they are superior. If you check in between, that's why I said there's a fine line between the superiority complex and the inferiority complex. There's a fine line there. Some people who act superior, in between or somewhere deep down along the line, there's also the feeling of inferiority. That's why they feel offended whenever they are treated otherwise. Whenever they're treated less, they're triggered, they're angry, they're upset, and they want to fight the other person. Most times also fighting themselves. Why did she talk to me like that? Why did he act like that? Is this supposed to do this way? I'm supposed to be given a big juice. Why did they give me the small juice? Don't they know that I am superior? People actually do act that way. But hey, it is a trigger. Identify it, right? There's so many other triggers. I don't know if I still have more here. Feeling of entitlement, that is a trigger. Also, let's see, the feeling of being needed. You have the feeling, how do I put it? The need to be needed. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. The need to be needed. It is also a trigger. And you see, when you're a person who somehow you want to be needed, you want to be at someone's attention, you want to be the center of attention, you want this person to need you, you always want to show that you can offer something. Now, the moment you are not needed, not that you're not valuable, but the moment you are not needed for a certain project or a certain time, or maybe your partner just says, I need a space, not that they're breaking up with you, then you're triggered. It's a trigger. It's a blind spot. Own it. So I hope I've been able to help you identify some of this blind spot, some of your triggers, things that could hinder you from being a better person, things that could hinder you from actually being the authentic self that you want to be. Remember that the goal is to be your authentic self. And so you need to identify these things. When you identify them, it will be easier for you to work on yourself. It will be easier for you to be a better person, because at this point you've identified the problem. Now the solution becomes really easy for you to handle, for you to grab. It hasn't a fun time, trust me. On our next episode, I won't exactly say the next episode, but hey, soon I will be sharing with you how to handle these triggers, because you really don't need them. I remember I also mentioned that we can't exactly be trigger free. We can only learn to manage them, because now we understand why we act that way, why we react to situations that way, because of these triggers, right? So I hope this has been helpful. If it was, please do comment. Do also like the video. And also tell a friend, tell another friend to subscribe. It hasn't a fun time indeed. So for now, thank you for watching.